I arrived in Japan carrying the weight of the last 4 years on my shoulders. The ship docked at Yokohama Harbor under a gray September sky. And as I stepped onto Japanese soil for the first time, I felt a confusing mix of victory, exhaustion, and something else I couldn't quite name. Relief that the fighting had stopped, maybe, but tinged with an uncertainty about what came next. "Welcome to the land of the rising sun, gentlemen," a naval officer said as my regiment disembarked, though I imagine they're not feeling so bright these days. The harbor bustled with American and British forces, ships coming and going, military vehicles rumbling along makeshift roads. Japan had surrendered just weeks ago after the bombs fell on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The war was over, but the work was far from done. My friend Randy nudged my arm. "Think they hate us, Hayden?" I watched a group of Japanese dock workers unloading supplies nearby, their faces carefully blank. "Wouldn't you?" The regiment assembled on the docks, duffel bags at our feet, waiting for transportation to our temporary barracks. Everything around us felt both alien and strangely quiet. This wasn't the Japan we'd been trained to fight. This was something else entirely. 3 days after our arrival, Colonel Jackson Figg gathered us in what had once been a school gymnasium. Figg was a career military man in his late 40s, with a permanent furrow between his eyebrows and a reputation for straight talk. "Tomorrow you'll be overseeing surrenders in Nagasaki," he announced, standing rigidly before us. "Each of you will be accepting the formal surrender of Japanese officers." I sat up straighter. Our regiment had been assigned to occupation duties, but this was our first significant task. "Listen carefully," Figg continued, his voice echoing in the sparse room. "These men have lost a war, but don't mistake that for a broken spirit. The Japanese culture places enormous value on honor. They've surrendered because their emperor commanded it, not because they believed they were defeated fairly." He paced slowly across the front of the room, hands clasped behind his back. "You will treat every officer with the respect their rank deserves. Accept their weapons with dignity. Remember that in their eyes, we won through a dishonorable act, dropping those bombs rather than facing them in battle." Randy whispered next to me. Hard to argue with results. I said nothing. The bombs had ended the war quickly, likely saving Allied lives, including possibly my own. But the stories and photos coming from Hiroshima and Nagasaki showed something beyond war, something that made me question what we'd unleashed. "One last thing," Figg said. "You represent the Allied forces now. Your behavior sets the tone for occupation." Dismissed. That night in the barracks, I polished my buttons and boots until they gleamed. Tomorrow would be ceremonial, symbolic. I wanted to get it right, though I wasn't entirely sure what right meant anymore. The next morning, we rode trucks to a clearing outside Nagasaki. The city itself lay mostly in ruins in the distance, the second city to experience atomic devastation. Buildings reduced to skeletal remains, the landscape transformed into something unrecognizable. I tried not to stare, but it was hard to look away from the physical manifestation of what we'd done. "Quite a view," Brandon Wallace muttered beside me. He was a superior officer I'd worked with occasionally, pragmatic to a fault. That's what happens when you refuse to surrender the first time. We lined up in formation as the Japanese officers arrived in trucks. They emerged wearing what remained of their uniforms, some tattered but all meticulously clean and pressed. They formed their own line opposite ours, spaced evenly, back straight, eyes forward. Whatever defeat they carried, they wore it with unmistakable discipline. Colonel Figg gave a short nod, and the ceremony began. One by one, each Japanese officer stepped forward to surrender his weapon to the Allied officer opposite him. The ritual had a solemn weight to it. These men were giving up more than swords. They were surrendering their purpose, their identity. I stood at attention, watching as the officer across from me approached. He was older than me, maybe mid-30s, with a lean face and perfect posture. His name, I'd been told, was Nathan Tanaka. His uniform was immaculate despite visible mending on one sleeve. Tanaka stopped exactly 3 paces in front of me, then removed his sword with practiced grace. He held it horizontally across both palms, a gesture that managed to make the surrender look like a gift freely given rather than something forced upon him. His face revealed nothing. I stepped forward and accepted the sword as I'd been instructed, giving a small bow of acknowledgement. Our eyes met as I straightened. That's when he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "You were not in Hiroshima," he said in surprisingly good English. It wasn't a question. I hesitated, unsure if responding violated protocol. "No," I answered quietly. Tanaka's eyes remained locked on mine. Hiroshima was a place of kami, what you might call gods, sacred ground. His voice stayed low, meant only for me. The bomb you dropped there, it awakened something ancient, something that should have remained sleeping. A chill ran up my back. Before I could respond, Tanaka stepped away, rejoining his line with the same perfect military bearing. The moment passed so quickly, I almost wondered if I'd imagined it. The ceremony continued around me, but my mind stuck on Tanaka's words. Had he been threatening me? Making some kind of symbolic statement about Japanese resilience? Or was it something else entirely? Later that afternoon, I found Major Brandon Wallace in the makeshift officers' mess. He sat alone with a cup of coffee and a stack of paperwork. I approached his table, standing at attention until he gestured to the empty chair across from him. "At ease, Parker." "What is it?" Brandon pushed his papers aside. "Sir, during the surrender ceremony, one of the Japanese officers said something unusual to me." I hesitated, suddenly aware of how strange it would sound. He mentioned Hiroshima being sacred ground, and that the bomb awakened something ancient. Brandon's eyebrows rose slightly. And it seemed, I don't know, sir, odd, like a warning of some kind. Brandon leaned back in his chair and took a sip of coffee. "Parker, these men just lost everything. Their country, their honor, their entire worldview. They're looking for ways to regain some psychological advantage." He set his cup down. "It's manipulation, plain and simple. They want us unsettled, questioning ourselves." "Yes, sir," I said, not entirely convinced. "What was this officer's name?" Brandon asked. "Tanaka. Nathan Tanaka." Brandon made a note. "I'll add it to his file." But I wouldn't lose any sleep over it. We dropped 2 bombs that leveled cities. If I were them, I'd be saying all sorts of cryptic things too. He picked up his pen again, signaling our conversation was over. I left the mess, Brandon's explanation making perfect sense on the surface. Yet something about Tanaka's words stuck with me. Not the content so much as the way he'd said them. There had been no anger, no attempt to intimidate. If anything, he'd seemed resigned, like someone passing on bad news they wished they didn't have to share. That night, I sat on my cot with paper and pen, writing to Jennifer. We'd been engaged for over a year now, the wedding postponed by my deployment. Her letters kept me grounded when everything else felt uncertain. "My dearest Jennifer, Japan is nothing like I expected. The people here move through their days with a quiet dignity that's hard to describe. They've lost everything, but you wouldn't know it from their bearing. Today I accepted the surrender of a Japanese officer. Something strange happened. He told me the bomb we dropped on Hiroshima had awakened something ancient. My superior officer says it's just psychological tactics, but I can't shake the feeling there was more to it than that. I know how that sounds. Maybe I'm just tired. The war is over, but being here feels like standing in the aftermath of something we don't fully understand yet. I paused, pen hovering over the paper. Jennifer was practical, level-headed. She'd probably agree with Brandon's assessment. But she also knew me well enough to understand that something about this encounter had gotten under my skin. I miss you terribly. Sometimes I think about our small apartment waiting in London, and it seems like a dream from someone else's life. But soon, I promise. All my love, Hayden. I sealed the letter, knowing it would be at least 2 weeks before it reached her. 2 weeks before I could share even this small part of what I was experiencing here. As I tried to sleep that night, Tanaka's words played over in my mind. The bomb you dropped there. It awakened something ancient. Something about his calm certainty bothered me more than any threat could have. What exactly did he think we had awakened? And why tell me, specifically? I rolled onto my side, trying to push the thoughts away. Occupation duty would last months, maybe longer. I needed to focus on the job at hand, not get caught up in cryptic comments from a defeated enemy. But as I drifted off, I couldn't shake the persistent feeling that there was something significant hiding beneath the surface of Tanaka's words, something important that I was missing. I received orders to join a mission to Hiroshima alongside my friend Randy and 3 other soldiers. We were to accompany American scientists gathering radiation data in the aftermath of the bombing. The orders came through Major Brandon Park, who handed me the paperwork with an unusually solemn expression. Adams, you're heading to Hiroshima tomorrow. You'll be escorting some American eggheads who need to take readings or some such. Nelson's going too, along with Thompson, Andrews, and Chang. I nodded, taking the papers. Yes, sir. How long will we be there? Just the day. You'll leave at 0500 hours. The Americans are very specific about limited exposure times. He paused, his expression hardening. I've heard it's not pleasant. Prepare yourself. That night in the barracks, Randy sat on his cot across from mine, checking his gear. Ever seen a city that's been atom-bombed? He asked, not looking up from his pack. No one has, I replied, except the poor souls who lived through it. Randy nodded slowly. First time for everything, I guess. The journey to Hiroshima the next morning was quiet. We rode in the back of a military truck with our gear, bouncing along roads that grew increasingly damaged as we approached the city. The American scientists, there were 4 of them, led by a Dr. Rowan Harper, sat toward the front, speaking in hushed tones about radiation levels and half-lives. Nothing could have prepared me for what awaited us. As our truck rounded a bend and Hiroshima came into view, my breath caught in my throat. The devastation was absolute, complete in a way I couldn't have imagined. Where a city had stood, there was now nothing. Not ruins in the way I had seen in London or even the bombed areas of Tokyo. This was different. A vast emptiness dotted with skeletal remains of structures, a few walls standing like broken teeth in an otherwise flattened landscape. Jesus Christ, Randy whispered beside me. The truck stopped at what had once been the edge of the city. We climbed out, and the reality hit me even harder. The air smelled wrong, like dust and chemicals and something else I couldn't identify. In every direction stretched a wasteland. Twisted metal, pulverized concrete, and the occasional recognizable object, a bathtub, a bicycle frame, the remains of a streetcar, punctuated the desolation. Dr. Harper, a tall man with wire-rimmed glasses and a stern expression, gathered us together. "This is Dr. Anderson," he said, gesturing to a younger man with thinning hair who carried a metal case. "He'll be leading the data collection today." Dr. Anderson stepped forward, his face grim. "Listen carefully. The radiation levels here are dangerous. We need to limit exposure to just 2 hours, not a minute more. Each of you will wear these." He handed out small badges. "Dosimeters. They measure radiation exposure. If they turn dark, you get out immediately. Stay with at least one other person at all times. Questions?" None of us spoke. What was there to ask? We were standing in the aftermath of something unprecedented, something that had changed warfare forever. "Good," Dr. Anderson continued. "The soldiers will provide security while we gather our samples and readings. We'll meet back here at 1100 hours exactly." As the scientists unpacked their equipment, Randy nudged me. "Let's look around. Stay close to the edge of the blast zone, like they said." We began walking through the wasteland together. The utter silence was disturbing. No birds, no insects, no distant sounds of life. Just the crunch of debris under our boots and the occasional metallic clang as something shifted in the gentle breeze. "I can't believe one bomb did all this," Randy said, his voice unnaturally loud in the stillness. I nodded, unable to form words. We passed what must have been a school. I could make out the twisted frame of a small desk, a blackened book cover, a broken piece of chalk. I looked away. After about 40 minutes of walking, Randy pointed to what appeared to be the remains of a government building to our right. "I'm going to check that out," he said. "Might be documents or something the brass would want." I glanced at my watch. "We should stick together." Randy shook his head. "We can cover more ground if we split up. That way building looks stable enough. You head toward that rise over there. Looks like it might have been some kind of religious site. Meet back here in 30 minutes? I hesitated, but eventually agreed. 30 minutes. Be careful. Always am, Randy said with a forced smile. As Randy picked his way toward the building, I headed toward what appeared to be the remains of a stone staircase leading up a small hill. As I got closer, I could make out the wreckage of what had indeed been some kind of shrine or temple. Stone lanterns, broken but recognizable, lined what was left of the path. I climbed the cracked steps carefully, noting how the pattern of destruction changed slightly here. The blast had clearly come from behind the hill, leaving some of the front-facing structures partially intact. Near the top of the hill, I stopped short. A man stood amid the wreckage, an elderly Japanese man, wearing the traditional garb of a Shinto priest, though his robes were tattered and stained with soot. He was facing away from me, looking at the remains of a wooden shrine gate. My hand moved instinctively to my sidearm. How had a civilian gotten into the restricted zone? And how had he survived here? "Excuse me," I called out, keeping my distance. "Sir, this area isn't safe. You shouldn't be here." The old man turned slowly. His face was deeply lined, his eyes dark and penetrating. Despite his obvious age, he stood straight-backed and dignified among the ruins. "I am where I should be, Lieutenant Adams," he replied in accented but clear English. I blinked in surprise. "How do you know my name?" The old man smiled faintly. "I am Easton Clark. I have tended this shrine to Amaterasu for 50 years. I took a few steps closer. struck by the incongruity of his calm presence in this landscape of destruction. Amaterasu? The sun goddess, he explained, gesturing to the ruins around us. This shrine was dedicated to her, the most powerful kami, the source of all light. I looked around at the demolished shrine, feeling a strange unease. I'm sorry about what happened to your shrine, to your city. Easton's eyes met mine, and something in his gaze made me shiver. Your bomb did more than destroy buildings, Lieutenant. It awakened her. Awakened who? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Amaterasu, he said simply. The atomic fire tore through more than just flesh and stone. It tore the veil between worlds. I shifted uncomfortably. Look, Mr. Clark, I was just following orders. I wasn't even part of the bombing mission. Orders, he repeated, the words sounding hollow in the wasteland surrounding us. Yes, many terrible things are done in the name of orders. He shook his head slowly. But intentions matter little when dealing with forces beyond human understanding. A chill ran through me despite the warm day. What do you mean? Easton approached me, his movements deliberate. From within his robes, he withdrew a small wooden object, a circular pendant carved with an intricate sunburst pattern. The goddess stirs, he said, holding out the wooden amulet. When the sun rises red 3 times, she will fully awaken. I hesitated and then took the amulet. It was warm to the touch, as if it had been sitting in sunlight, though we stood in shadow. What happens when she awakens? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Easton's expression was unreadable. That depends on whether she finds humanity worthy of her light or deserving of her wrath. Before I could respond, Randy's voice called out from down the hill. Hayden, you up there? I turned toward his voice. Yeah, I'm here. When I looked back to continue my conversation with Easton, I froze. The elderly priest was gone. I spun around, searching the ruins, but there was no sign of him. No footprints in the dust, no movement among the broken stones. It was as if he had simply vanished into thin air. Hayden, Randy called again, closer now. Who were you talking to? I clutched the wooden amulet tightly in my hand, staring at the empty space where Easton Clark had stood moments before. I told Randy everything about the old priest as we walked back toward the research team. The words poured out of me. The shrine, the warnings about Amaterasu, and the wooden amulet that still felt warm in my pocket. You talked to an old Japanese priest? Up there? Randy stopped walking and looked back at the hill I'd just come from. Let's go find him. I want to hear this crazy story myself. I nodded, though part of me already suspected we wouldn't find anything. He said his name was Easton Clark. Been living in Hiroshima for decades. Surviving on what, I have no idea. We climbed back up the stone steps, my boots kicking up gray dust with each step. At the top, only broken stone foundations remained. No sign of the elderly man. There's nothing here, Hayden, Randy said, scanning the area. No priest, no hidden food supplies. Nobody could live here. I walked the entire clearing twice, checking behind fallen columns and peering into crevices where a small man might take shelter. Nothing. Even the spot where we'd sat talking showed no sign of another person. I swear he was right here. We sat together. I pulled out the wooden amulet. He gave me this. Randy took it, turning the wooden disc in his fingers. Well, you've got something at least. But maybe the radiation's making you see things. Dr. Anderson said it can mess with your head. I took the amulet back, my thumb tracing the carved sunburst pattern. I wasn't seeing things. When we returned to the research area, I spotted Dr. Harper talking with another scientist near one of the measurement stations. I approached him while Randy rejoined the other soldiers. "Dr. Harper, can I speak with you for a minute?" I asked. The scientist looked up from his clipboard. "Lieutenant Adams, right? What can I do for you?" "I met someone up on that hill, an elderly priest who survived the blast. Said his name was Easton Clark." Dr. Harper's eyebrows rose. "A survivor? Here? That's unlikely. The radiation levels are still dangerous. No one should be living this close to the hypocenter." He told me some things about this place, about the bomb awakening something. I hesitated, suddenly aware of how crazy I sounded. "Have you noticed anything strange around here? Anything you can't explain?" Dr. Harper glanced at his colleague, then back to me. "Well, now that you mention it, we've recorded some anomalous readings, radiation patterns that don't match our models, instrument failures near certain sites." He lowered his voice. "There was a temple here before the bombing. Some of my Japanese assistants refused to take measurements near that area. They say it's disturbed ground. The next morning, after a night of broken sleep, I found Lieutenant Rodriguez at the command post. He'd been handling local intelligence and civilian records since we arrived in Japan. "I need to find information about a man named Easton Clark," I said. "British expat, lived in Hiroshima for decades, worked as a Shinto priest." Rodriguez looked up from his paperwork. "That's pretty specific. Any reason?" "Met him yesterday. Need to verify some information." He nodded and led me to a small office where stacks of papers covered every surface. The Americans have been compiling casualty lists and survivor accounts. If your man was a foreign national living here, he'd be in these records. We spent an hour going through files until Rodriguez pulled out a thin folder. "Clark, Easton, British citizen, came to Japan in 1900, married a local woman, became a priest at the Hiroshima Gokoku Shrine." My stomach tightened. "And he survived the blast?" Rodriguez looked up at me, his expression changing. "No, Lieutenant. Easton Clark died on August 6th. Body identified by another priest who survived in an outlying area." He slid a photograph across the desk. The black and white image showed the same weathered face that had spoken to me on the hill. Same deep-set eyes. Same thin white hair tied back. "That's impossible," I whispered. "I spoke with him yesterday. He gave me something." Rodriguez looked genuinely concerned. "Are you feeling all right, Lieutenant? Radiation exposure can cause confusion, hallucinations." "I'm not confused." I pushed my chair back, the wooden legs scraping against the floor. He was there. We talked for 20 minutes. "Hayden?" Rodriguez rarely used my first name. "This man died 7 weeks ago. The records are clear." I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Clark's face, heard his warnings. I had spoken with a dead man, not someone who looked like him or reminded me of him. The exact same person. The weeks that followed turned into a blur of duties and sleepless nights. I requested a transfer back to our main base in Yokohama, away from Hiroshima, which Major Park granted without much questioning. The nightmares started 3 days after my return. In each one, Nathan Tanaka and Easton Clark stood side by side beneath a sun that grew redder and larger with each passing minute. They never spoke, just watched me with knowing eyes as the crimson sun expanded until it filled the entire sky, burning everything beneath it. I would wake up sweating. The sheets twisted around my legs, and my first thought each morning became an urgent need to check the sunrise. I would rush to the window or step outside the barracks. holding my breath until I confirmed the sun rose normal and yellow. "You look like hell," Randy told me one morning as I returned from my dawn vigil. "Just not sleeping well," I replied, not meeting his eyes. Still thinking about that priest who wasn't there. I wanted to tell him everything. The photo that confirmed Clark had been dead when I met him. The dreams, my new morning ritual. But I just shrugged, trying not to. But I couldn't stop. The wooden amulet stayed in my pocket during the day and under my pillow at night. Sometimes I'd wake up clutching it, the wood warm against my palm as if it had absorbed my body heat. I tried to be rational. Perhaps I'd heard someone mention Clark before and constructed a hallucination. Maybe the radiation had affected me more than the others. The military psychologist would have plenty to say about stress responses and trauma after witnessing the bomb's aftermath. Yet none of these explanations felt right. What I had experienced was real. The conversation, the warnings, the amulet that still sat in my pocket. Clark's words about Amaterasu awakening played over and over in my mind. What if the bomb had disturbed something beyond our understanding? What if the goddess was real and she was angry? I found myself reading everything I could about Shinto beliefs, borrowing books from the base library and questioning any Japanese worker who would talk to me. Most looked frightened and hurried away when I mentioned Amaterasu and atomic fire in the same breath. Some nights, I'd take out the amulet and stare at it, wondering why a ghost would give me a physical object. What purpose did it serve? Was it protection or a warning? The carved sunburst seemed to change slightly depending on how the light hit it, sometimes appearing to pulse with inner warmth. I considered throwing it away several times. I even walked to the harbor once, holding the amulet over the water, ready to drop it into the depths. But each time, something stopped me. Not superstition, I told myself, but the nagging feeling that it mattered, that I had been chosen for a reason. So I kept it close, checked the sunrise each morning, and tried to convince myself that I wasn't going crazy, that seeing a dead priest and receiving warnings about an angry sun goddess was somehow part of a greater truth I wasn't yet equipped to understand. I received orders to return to England in December. Major Park handed me the papers with the same cool efficiency he applied to every administrative task, adding only a brief, "Safe travels, Lieutenant Adams," before moving on. After 4 months in occupied Japan, witnessing the aftermath of war and atomic devastation, I would be going home. The typed instructions detailed my departure date, transportation arrangements, and processing requirements with typical military thoroughness. As I folded the papers and slipped them into my pocket, I noticed the empty feeling in my stomach. Relief mixed with a nagging sense that I was carrying something back with me that didn't belong in peaceful England. Randy Nelson came into the barracks as I stood there, tossed his cap onto his bunk, and noticed my expression. "Those your orders, home?" he asked, dropping onto his cot with a tired sigh. "Back to that fiancé you're always writing to?" "Next week," I replied, keeping my voice even. "Transport ship from Yokohama." Randy didn't know about the priest on the hill in Hiroshima, or the wooden amulet, or how I'd begun checking the sunrise each morning with growing unease. Those experiences remained mostly locked within me, shared only partially with Dr. Harper and Lieutenant Rodriguez, both of whom had offered rational explanations I wanted desperately to believe. The following evening, I knelt beside my footlocker, organizing my sparse belongings. Military life trained you to travel light. Uniforms folded according to regulation, toiletries arranged in exact order, a few dog-eared books, and Jennifer's letters tied with twine. As I lifted my shaving kit from its designated corner, my fingers brushed against something underneath. The wooden amulet. I picked it up, its strange warmth immediate against my palm. The sunburst pattern carved into its surface caught the dim electric light of the barracks. I'd tucked it here weeks ago, perhaps unconsciously trying to bury it among mundane possessions. Sitting back on my heels, I rotated the disc slowly between my fingers. The rational choice would be leaving it behind, burying it somewhere in Japan, returning it to the land where the mysterious Easton Clark had given it to me. This physical reminder of an encounter that defied explanation could stay where it belonged, and I could return to England unburdened by its presence. Instead, I wrapped the amulet carefully in my handkerchief and placed it in my inner pocket, close to my body. Whatever this object meant, whatever truth lay behind my encounter with a man who had apparently died weeks before our meeting, I couldn't simply abandon it. It represented a responsibility I couldn't explain to others, but felt with absolute clarity whenever I held it. The journey home passed in a sequence of military transports, naval vessels, and temporary quarters. When England's coastline finally appeared through the December fog, I stood on the ship's deck, collar turned up against the biting wind. After months abroad, this sight should have filled me with uncomplicated joy. Instead, I experienced an odd disconnect, as if returning to a place remembered from someone else's photographs. Jennifer waited at Portsmouth Harbor among the crowd of families, her red wool coat making her easy to spot despite her small frame. She saw me on the gangway and pushed forward, waving until I caught her eye. "You're home," she said against my chest when I finally reached her, her voice muffled by my uniform. "You're really home." I held her tightly, breathing in her familiar lavender scent, feeling her warmth seep through layers of wool and cotton. This was what I had fought for, what had sustained me during lonely nights in Japan. This was reality, not dead priests or angry goddesses or wooden amulets that stayed warm without explanation. We married in February 1946, a modest ceremony with 40 guests in the small stone church where Jennifer had been baptized. She glowed with happiness in her white dress, holding a bouquet of early spring flowers that her mother had somehow procured despite ongoing shortages. I worked to match her joy, to remain present rather than drifting to memories of Japan. For most of that day, I succeeded. When I slipped the gold band onto her finger, I focused on the moment, on her smile, on the future we were building together. The transition to civilian life proved more challenging than I had anticipated. The ordered schedule of military service had become so deeply ingrained that its absence left me adrift. I would wake before dawn, tense and ready for inspection, only to remember I was in our small cottage in Sussex, with no reports to file, no men under my command, no clear objective for the day beyond the vague instruction to readjust. Through contacts from my service years, I secured a teaching position at Whitefield Military Academy outside Brighton. The role offered a compromise, close enough to military life to feel familiar, but removed from the front lines and the weight of combat decisions. I taught tactical history and strategy to cadets who viewed war through maps and theories rather than blood and fire. Young men whose understanding of the Pacific conflict came from newspapers and newsreels rather than the scorched earth of Hiroshima. "Lieutenant Adams," they called me, though I'd formally left that rank behind. The familiar address served as a bridge between my past and present, helping me navigate this new terrain of lesson plans and faculty meetings after years of battlefield chaos. Yet even as I established this new life, old habits and fears persisted. Each morning, I would wake before Jennifer, ease myself out of bed without disturbing her, and move to our east-facing window. There, I would wait, watching with careful attention as the first light broke over the horizon. I examined each sunrise closely, looking for any unusual coloration or behavior. Only when the sun had fully appeared, normal and yellow, would the tension across my shoulders begin to ease. Only then could I return to bed or begin preparing breakfast. The day's first task completed. Confirmation that the world remained as it should be. Jennifer noticed these pre-dawn vigils. How could she miss my empty place in bed? The creak of floorboards as I moved to the window, the outline I cast against the early light. Initially, she remained silent, perhaps attributing my behavior to the adjustment period many veterans experienced. But as weeks stretched to months with no change, concern etched itself into her expression. "What are you looking for out there?" she asked one morning in April, finding me at the window as dawn approached. She stood beside me in her nightgown, arms crossed against the chill. I kept my eyes on the horizon where the first pale light had begun to appear. Just seeing what kind of day it will be. Every morning, at exactly the same time. I had no reasonable answer that wouldn't sound mad, so I simply reached for her hand, noting how soft her skin felt compared to my own. "I'm here when you want to talk about it," she said quietly, squeezing my fingers. "Whatever it is that wakes you up like this." Her patience only deepened my love for her while intensifying my guilt. She deserved a husband fully present, not one haunted by experiences he couldn't explain or even fully believe himself. Not one who checked the sunrise with the desperate vigilance of a man expecting catastrophe. I tried pushing away the memories. Nathan Tanaka surrendering his sword while warning about what we had awakened in Hiroshima. Easton Clark, the priest who shouldn't have been alive, pressing the wooden amulet into my palm and speaking of Amaterasu's anger. The photograph Rodriguez had shown me, confirming Clark had died weeks before our meeting. But these memories refused to stay buried. They surfaced unexpectedly. While lecturing about Pacific theater strategies, during faculty discussions about atomic weapons, or in the quiet darkness before sleep, claimed me. A student would ask an innocent question about Japan, and suddenly I would see the devastated landscape of Hiroshima spread before me. Feel the ghost weight of the amulet in my pocket. Hear Clark's voice warning me about the sun goddess watching us. The wooden amulet remained wrapped in its handkerchief, hidden in a drawer beneath my socks and undershirts. Occasionally, after particularly vivid dreams of Japan, I would take it out and hold it, feeling its persistent warmth against my skin. The sunburst pattern remained as crisp as the day Clark had given it to me, the wood never cooling regardless of the temperature around it. Once, during a bitter cold snap in late February, I left it on the windowsill overnight, only to find it warm to the touch in the morning, as if it contained its own internal source of heat. In my more logical moments, particularly during daylight hours while teaching at the academy or reading in my study, I dismissed everything as the product of stress, radiation exposure, or simply my mind's attempt to process the incomprehensible destruction I had witnessed. The priest had been a hallucination brought on by heat and trauma. The warmth of the amulet merely psychological. My continued fixation a form of battle fatigue that would eventually fade as I settled further into civilian life. But during darker periods, usually in those pre-dawn hours as I waited for the sun to rise, I feared Easton Clark had spoken truth, that the bomb had indeed awakened something ancient and powerful. That Amaterasu, the sun goddess, had noticed humanity's new capability for destruction and was watching, judging, perhaps preparing to respond in ways I could barely imagine. The uncertainty consumed my thoughts during quiet moments. Had it been merely radiation that caused the strange readings Dr. Harper mentioned? Was it coincidence that Japanese assistants refused to take measurements near certain sites due to them being disturbed ground? Had I simply encountered another survivor who happened to resemble a dead priest? Or had I truly spoken with a ghost, received a warning about divine retribution, been entrusted with knowledge few others possessed? I couldn't resolve these questions, couldn't reconcile the scientific reality of nuclear weapons with the supernatural implications of my experience. But regardless of which explanation was true, I felt connected to whatever might follow. The amulet, whether magical or mundane, represented a responsibility I had accepted when I took it from Clark's hands and decided to keep it. If the sunrise ever changed, if Amaterasu truly made herself known, I would be watching. I had to be watching. I woke up before dawn on August 6th, 1946. 1 year exactly since the bombing of Hiroshima. Sleep had come fitfully, as it often did these days. The darkness of my bedroom felt heavy, almost expectant. Without needing to check the clock on our bedside table, I knew it was nearly time for sunrise. Jennifer slept peacefully beside me, her breathing soft and regular. I slid out from under the covers, careful not to wake her. The wooden floor was cool beneath my feet as I moved to the dresser where I kept the amulet. I had taken to checking it each morning, though I rarely took it out anymore. Today felt different. I pulled open the drawer and unwrapped the handkerchief. The amulet sat there, its carved sunburst pattern somehow visible even in the dim light. When I picked it up, it felt warmer than the surrounding air, just as it always did. Something compelled me to take it with me this morning. With the amulet clutched in my palm, I made my way downstairs and out onto the small porch of our Sussex cottage. The eastern horizon showed the first hints of daylight, a pale glow cutting through the darkness. Birds had just begun their morning songs, creating a peaceful backdrop that felt at odds with the tension in my chest. As the light grew stronger, something changed. The normal golden glow of dawn shifted, taking on a reddish tint that spread across the horizon. I blinked, wondering if my eyes were playing tricks on me. But the color intensified, bleeding into the sky until the entire sunrise had transformed into a deep, unsettling crimson, blood red, exactly as Easton Clark had described it would be. My heart hammered against my ribs. The amulet in my hand seemed to pulse with heat. This was no ordinary sunrise. This was what the old priest had warned me about. His words came back to me with terrible clarity. 3 red sunrises would mark her awakening. My God, I whispered to the empty air. It's real. I stood there, unable to move, watching as the blood-red sun climbed higher in the sky. After perhaps 30 minutes, the color began to fade, returning to its normal golden hue as if nothing unusual had happened at all. But I knew what I had seen. When I finally went back inside, my hands were shaking. Jennifer was in the kitchen making tea, her hair still tousled from sleep. "You were up early," she said, smiling. "Everything all right?" I nodded, not trusting myself to speak about what I'd witnessed. How could I explain this to her? She already worried about my fixation on Japan, on the things I'd experienced there. Adding talk of angry goddesses would only deepen her concern. "Just couldn't sleep," I said, tucking the amulet into my pocket. "Anniversary of Hiroshima today." Her expression softened with understanding. "Of course. Would you like some tea?" That afternoon, I went to the local library. I told Jennifer I needed to prepare for my classes at Whitefield. But the books I sought had nothing to do with tactical history. Instead, I headed for the small section on the world religions and mythology. The library had precious little on Japanese beliefs. A few chapters in broader books about Eastern religions, a slim volume on Shinto practices. I checked out everything they had, earning a curious look from the librarian. Research for my students, I explained with a forced smile, broadening their cultural understanding. Back home, I spread the books across our dining table and began reading, taking notes in a small journal. Amaterasu, the great goddess of the sun in Japanese mythology. The texts described her as the most important deity in the Shinto pantheon, ancestor of the imperial family. I learned about how she once hid herself in a cave, plunging the world into darkness after a conflict with her brother Susanoo. The other gods and goddesses tried desperately to lure her out. They hung a mirror outside the cave and held a raucous celebration. When Amaterasu peeked out to see what was happening, she caught sight of her own brilliant reflection and was drawn out of hiding, bringing light back to the world. As I read, a terrible thought formed in my mind. What if the atomic flash over Hiroshima, a light brighter than 1,000 suns, had somehow disturbed or awakened Amaterasu? The bomb had fallen on sacred ground, as Nathan Tanaka had told me. What if that blinding flash had caught the attention of something ancient and powerful? The next day, I traveled to London, where the university libraries held more extensive collections. I spent hours there, moving from book to book, absorbing everything I could find about Shinto beliefs, Japanese gods, and Amaterasu in particular. I learned that Amaterasu was typically portrayed as benevolent, but like many deities, she could be provoked to anger. The texts described how natural disasters were sometimes attributed to divine displeasure. What greater provocation could there be than an atomic bomb? On my third day of research, I found a small reference to red sunrises in a text about Shinto omens. They were considered warnings, signs of divine displeasure. My hand shook as I copied the passage into my notebook. When I returned home that evening, Jennifer was waiting with concern etched on her face. "You've barely been home?" she said. "What's going on, Hayden? This isn't just about preparing lessons." I couldn't bring myself to tell her everything, not yet. "I've been looking into something from Japan," I said. "Something that's been bothering me since I came back." She placed her hand on mine. "You can talk to me, you know, whatever it is." I nodded, but changed the subject. That night, I wrote letters to every contact I could think of who might have been in Hiroshima around the same time I was. Dr. Harper, who had been with the research team. Lieutenant Rodriguez, who had helped me research Easton Clark. I even tried to locate the address for Nathan Tanaka, though I wasn't sure my letter would reach him. In each message, I was careful with my wording. I asked if they had experienced anything unusual in Hiroshima, if they had met any local priests or heard stories about Amaterasu. I mentioned nothing about red sunrises or my own encounters. I needed unbiased responses, not confirmation of my fears. Days passed with no replies. I checked the mail eagerly each morning, but found nothing. Meanwhile, I kept the amulet with me constantly now. I moved it from my dresser drawer to my pocket, where I could feel its reassuring warmth throughout the day. Yet even as it comforted me, it troubled me. A constant reminder of what I had seen and what might still be coming. At night, I would take it out and study it in the lamplight, tracing the carved sunburst pattern with my finger. What was this object really? A simple charm, or something more? I felt both protected by its presence and threatened by what it represented. 2 more red sunrises to come, according to Easton Clark's warning. What would happen after the third? After a week with no responses to my letters, I tried a different approach. I contacted the War Office, requesting information about any unusual reports from Hiroshima in the days following the bombing. The clerk I spoke with seemed confused by my inquiry. "What sort of unusual reports, Lieutenant Adams?" "Anything out of the ordinary," I said, "particularly regarding local religious sites or practices." "I'm afraid that's not the sort of information we typically collect," he replied with a hint of suspicion. "May I ask why you're interested?" I muttered something about historical documentation for educational purposes and thanked him for his time. That evening, I sat on our porch watching the sunset. The amulet was in my hand, and I turned it over and over between my fingers. I had found no one else who had encountered Easton Clark. No one else who had been warned about Amaterasu's awakening. If this was happening, if a goddess was truly stirring from her slumber, I appeared to be the only one who knew. The weight of that knowledge settled over me like a physical burden. What was I supposed to do with this? Who would even believe me if I tried to explain? Jennifer found me there as darkness fell, still staring at the wooden amulet in my palm. "What is that?" she asked, sitting beside me. For a moment, I considered making up a story about a souvenir, but I was tired of keeping secrets from her. "It's an amulet," I said, "given to me by a Shinto priest in Hiroshima." "May I?" she asked, holding out her hand. I hesitated, then passed it to her. She examined it carefully, running her thumb over the carved surface. "It's beautiful," she said. "But why do you keep looking at it like it might bite you?" I took a deep breath. Perhaps it was time to share at least part of the truth. "The priest who gave it to me said it was for protection," I explained. "He believed that something happened when the bomb fell. Something to do with their sun goddess, Amaterasu." Jennifer handed the amulet back to me. "And you believe that too?" "I don't know what I believe anymore," I admitted. "But I saw something this morning, Jennifer. The sunrise was red, blood red, just like he said it would be." She didn't respond right away, and I couldn't bring myself to look at her face, to see the concern or disbelief that must be there. "The anniversary of the bombing," she said finally. "It affected you deeply." I nodded, letting her believe that was all it was, my mind playing tricks on me due to the emotional weight of the date. But I knew what I had seen. From that day forward, I kept the amulet with me always, in my pocket during the day, under my pillow at night. Whenever I touched it, I felt that same strange mix of comfort and dread. It was my connection to what had happened in Hiroshima, my proof that the warnings were real. If another red sunrise came, I would be ready. I would be watching. I stood frozen on our cottage porch as the second blood-red sunrise crept above the horizon. Exactly 1 month had passed since the first crimson dawn, and this time Jennifer's hand gripped mine as we watched the sky transform. The normal golden glow had been replaced by something that looked like a wound opening in the east. Deep red rays reaching across the landscape, painting our small garden in an unnatural light. "What does it mean?" Jennifer asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The wooden amulet burned hot in my pocket as I watched the scarlet disk climb higher. I didn't want to answer her question because the truth was too unsettling. "I don't know," I admitted finally. "But this is what the priest warned me about. 3 red sunrises." We stayed on the porch until the sun gradually returned to its normal color, just as it had the previous month. The transformation took almost 40 minutes. 40 minutes of standing in silence, watching what felt like a message I couldn't fully understand. That afternoon, I wrote to Dr. Anderson at Los Alamos. I'd hesitated for weeks about contacting him, worried that my account would sound like the ravings of a disturbed mind. But after the second sunrise, keeping silent felt more dangerous than risking ridicule. I sat at our small writing desk and filled 6 pages with everything. The first meeting with Nathan Tanaka in Nagasaki, my encounter with the supposedly dead priest Yamamoto in Hiroshima, the amulet, and now the 2 red sunrises appearing exactly 1 month apart. I described the precise color and duration of each event, noting the dates and times with military precision. I sealed the letter before I could reconsider and walked to the village post office immediately. The postmaster raised an eyebrow at the American address, but said nothing as he weighed the envelope. "How long to reach the States?" I asked. 10 days or so if the weather holds for the crossing," he replied. The waiting was excruciating. Each morning I checked the sunrise, relieved to see normal golden light, but knowing that according to the pattern, we had almost a month until the potential third occurrence. I continued teaching at the academy, but my concentration faltered. The cadets noticed, though they were too disciplined to comment. Dr. Anderson's response arrived 20 days after I sent my letter. I recognized his handwriting on the envelope and took it straight to my study, closing the door before tearing it open. His letter began formally, thanking me for my correspondence, but quickly turned to matters that made my stomach tighten. "Your observations regarding the unusual solar phenomena coincide with similar reports from observers near our facility. On the exact dates you mentioned, several staff members noted a distinctly red solar appearance during sunrise, lasting approximately 35 to 45 minutes before normalizing. More troubling are the radiation readings we've recorded on these days. Our instruments detect patterns that defy current scientific understanding. Radiation levels fluctuate in wave-like patterns that correspond to no known natural or artificial source. Several monitoring stations have malfunctioned during these events. I must ask if you've shared this information with others. The coincidence between these occurrences and proximity to nuclear research facilities seems beyond chance. We have received reports from colleagues in Oak Ridge and Hanford of similar phenomena." The letter continued with technical details about radiation patterns and questions about the amulet I'd mentioned. He requested I send it to him for analysis, or at minimum provide detailed photographs. The closing paragraph struck me hardest. "Lieutenant Adams, I find myself considering explanations I would have dismissed as superstition 6 months ago. If you receive any additional information regarding these occurrences or their potential meaning, I urge you to contact me immediately. We have another test scheduled 3 weeks from now. Some of my colleagues are pushing to postpone." I folded the letter and placed it in my desk drawer next to the amulet. That night, the nightmares began. I dreamed of standing in a field as the horizon turned crimson. The red sun rose, but instead of stopping at its normal size, it continued to expand, growing until it filled half the sky. The heat became unbearable. In the dream, I tried to run, but my feet wouldn't move. The growing red disk consumed everything: trees, buildings, people, until only I remained, watching as the world burned away. I woke gasping, sheets soaked with sweat. The nightmare returned each night with minor variations. Sometimes I stood in Hiroshima amid the ruins. Other times I was on our cottage porch with Jennifer beside me. But the ending never changed. The red sun always grew until it devoured everything. After a week of broken sleep, Jennifer confronted me at breakfast. "You need to tell me what's happening," she said, placing her hand over mine. You cry out in your sleep. You check the sunrise every morning, and now these letters from America. Her eyes held no judgment, only concern. The weight of carrying these fears alone suddenly felt too heavy. That evening, I told Jennifer everything, not just about the amulets and sunrises, but the deeper fears I'd been harboring about what we might have awakened with the bombing of Hiroshima. I explained Yamamoto's warnings about Amaterasu's anger, about divine retribution for humanity's hubris. Most people would think I've lost my mind, I said after finishing my account. Jennifer was quiet for a long time, staring into her tea. I don't think you've lost your mind, she said finally. I've seen the red sunrise myself, and the way that wooden charm heats up, that's not normal. You believe me then? About all of it? I believe something is happening that science can't explain, she answered carefully. And if there's even a chance that what you experienced in Japan was real, we can't ignore it. Her acceptance was like a door opening in a dark room. For the first time since returning from Japan, I didn't feel completely alone with my knowledge. The next day, I began collecting newspapers, not just local ones, but national and international publications whenever I could find them. I created a system, scanning for any mentions of unusual atmospheric phenomena, solar anomalies, or unexplained events near research facilities. Most days yielded nothing, but occasionally I found something. A small article about unusual dawn coloration observed near Oak Ridge, Tennessee. A letter to the editor from a farmer in New Mexico describing the sky bleeding at sunrise. A scientific note about unexplained interference with radio equipment in areas of Washington state where the Hanford site operated. I plotted each occurrence on a map, using pins to mark locations and dates. A pattern emerged. Red sunrises or similar phenomena appeared exclusively near places connected to nuclear research or weapons development. Some reports came from as far away as the Soviet Union, where intelligence suggested their own nuclear program was advancing. Jennifer helped me organize the information, creating a timeline that matched reported phenomena against known nuclear activities. The correlation was undeniable. Something was responding to humanity's nuclear endeavors, and that something seemed to be growing more active. What if the third sunrise isn't the end? Jennifer asked one evening as we reviewed our findings. What if it's just the beginning? I had no answer for her, but the question nested in my mind alongside my growing unease. The amulet remained warm in my pocket, a constant reminder of promises made to a priest who shouldn't have been there. Our cottage walls became covered with newspaper clippings and notes, a tapestry of evidence pointing to something beyond ordinary understanding. As we approached the date when the third sunrise would be due, if the pattern held, my anxiety deepened. What began as concern had transformed into something closer to dread, a persistent certainty that we were approaching a threshold humanity wasn't prepared to cross. I received a letter from Japan a week before the expected third red sunrise. The mail came on a Tuesday morning, dropped through our letterbox with its usual soft thud. Jennifer had already left for her morning errands in the village, leaving me alone with a small stack of correspondence. Most of it was unexceptional. A utility bill, a circular from the local grocer advertising autumn produce, and a letter from the academy about the upcoming term. But the last envelope made me stop cold. The foreign stamps and postmarks were unmistakable. It had traveled across oceans and continents to reach our little cottage in Sussex. My name and address were written in precise, elegant handwriting that I recognized immediately, though I'd only seen it once before. On surrender documents in Nagasaki nearly a year ago. My fingers trembled slightly as I opened it. The envelope contained 2 items: a newspaper clipping, yellowed at the edges and printed in Japanese, and a folded note on thin paper. I set aside the clipping momentarily and unfolded the note. It was brief, written in the same careful hand. Lieutenant Adams, some gods can be appeased. Let us pray that she is one of them. The shrine is being rebuilt as an offering. Nathan Tanaka. I sat down heavily at the kitchen table, reading the words over and over. It wasn't my imagination. It wasn't radiation sickness or hallucination or the trauma of war. Tanaka remembered our conversation. He believed it too. Believed enough to write to me across the world as the third sunrise approached. With shaking hands, I reached for the newspaper clipping and examined it. Though I couldn't read the Japanese text, there was a photograph of workers rebuilding what appeared to be a small shrine. The only word I recognized was Amaterasu, which appeared several times throughout the article. I'd seen enough Japanese newspapers during my time in the occupation to recognize that this was from a Hiroshima local paper. The wooden amulet, which I'd taken to carrying in my pocket constantly, felt warm against my leg, as if responding to Tanaka's message. I spread both items on the table, staring at them as if they might reveal more secrets. This was confirmation of everything. Of the priest who shouldn't have been alive, of the warnings about the sun goddess, of the blood-red sunrises that had appeared exactly 1 month apart. It was real. All of it was real. I'm not crazy. I whispered to the empty kitchen, a strange laugh of relief escaping my throat. Though relief hardly seemed appropriate given what this confirmation meant. That in less than a week, the third sunrise might bring something terrible. When Jennifer returned from the village around noon, I was still at the kitchen table, though I'd made tea that had long since gone cold. The items from Japan remained spread before me. Hayden? Her voice was tentative as she set down her shopping basket. What's happened? I looked up at her, not sure if my expression showed relief or terror. I got a letter from Japan, from Tanaka. She hung her coat and came to stand beside me, placing a gentle hand on my shoulder. The Japanese officer? From the surrender ceremony? I nodded and pushed the letter and clipping toward her. He knows about the sunrises. He's written to warn me. Jennifer picked up the note first, her eyes widening as she read. Then she examined the newspaper clipping, tracing the photograph with her fingertip. They're rebuilding a shrine to her, she said quietly. To Amaterasu. Yes. I got up and paced the small kitchen. Don't you see what this means? It wasn't just the priest. Tanaka knows too. He remembers what he said to me about Hiroshima being sacred ground, about the bomb awakening something ancient. He believes it enough to track down my address and send this. Jennifer sat down, still holding the clipping. What does he mean by, some gods can be appeased? I stopped pacing and turned to her. I think he's saying there's hope, that rebuilding the shrine might be a way to calm her anger. But will it be enough? Jennifer asked, her voice steady despite the enormity of the question. And in time for the third sunrise? I pulled out the chair across from her and sat down again. I don't know. I wish I could ask him more. We spent the afternoon talking about what we could possibly do about an angry sun goddess. The absurdity of the situation wasn't lost on us. A British ex-soldier and his wife in a Sussex cottage discussing how to appease a Japanese deity. Yet the evidence before us, combined with what we'd witnessed with our own eyes, made the conversation deadly serious. What did you learn from those books you read? Jennifer asked, making fresh tea for us both. About appeasing Amaterasu? Not much that seems practical, I admitted. The myth says when she hid in the cave, the other gods used music and dance and a mirror to trick her into coming out. But that was to lure her out when she was hiding, not to calm her when she's angry. Jennifer set the teacups on the table. There must be proper rituals, things Japanese people have done for centuries when they want to honor her. Yes, I said slowly, an idea forming. There might be someone who knows. There's a small Japanese community in London, and I think there's a Shinto priest who serves them. Could you talk to him? Jennifer asked. I ran a hand through my hair, suddenly unsure. And say what? That I think the atomic bomb angered the sun goddess, and now the world might face her judgment? That I met a dead priest who gave me an amulet that gets hot when the sun turns red? I gave a bitter laugh. He'll think I'm insane. Show him the letter, Jennifer suggested. And the clipping, and the amulet. He's a Shinto priest. He understands his own religion better than any book you could read. I considered it, weighing the embarrassment of sounding mad against the potential consequences of doing nothing. Maybe, I said finally. I'll think about it. The days passed with agonizing slowness. Each morning, I checked the sunrise with mounting anxiety. Relieved to see normal golden light, but knowing we were counting down to October 6th. I carried Tanaka's letter in one pocket and the amulet in the other, frequently touching both as if to reassure myself of their reality. I made several attempts to draft a letter to the London Shinto priest, but each one sounded more ridiculous than the last. How could I explain without context? And there wasn't time for a proper exchange of letters before the third sunrise. By October 5th, the day before the expected third sunrise, my nerves were stretched to the breaking point. I'd barely slept the previous night, and as evening fell, I knew sleep would be impossible. I'm going to sit on the porch tonight, I told Jennifer as we cleared away our hardly touched dinner. I want to watch the eastern sky. All night? She asked, though her tone suggested she'd expected this. Yes, I can't sleep anyway. I looked at her tired face, marked with worry lines that hadn't been there months ago. You should rest, though. She shook her head. I'll sit with you, for a while at least. After sunset, we brought blankets and chairs to the porch. For several hours, we sat together in the growing chill of the October night, speaking little but drawing comfort from each other's presence. The stars emerged, crystal clear in the autumn sky, and I searched them for any sign of disturbance, any hint of what morning might bring. Around 10, Jennifer's head began to nod. I insisted she go to bed, promising to wake her before dawn. She kissed me and went inside, extracting a promise that I would call her if anything at all, seemed unusual. Then I was alone with the night. I pulled the wooden amulet from my pocket and held it in my palm. It was warm, as always, but not hot. Not yet. I wondered if its heat would increase as dawn approached, giving me some warning of what was to come. The hours crept by. Midnight came and went. I paced the porch to keep warm and to fight off exhaustion, then returned to my chair, wrapped in blankets against the autumn chill. My mind raced through everything I knew, everything I'd read, everything I'd experienced since that day in Nagasaki when Tanaka first spoke to me. What would happen if the sun rose red a third time? Would it simply be another omen? Or would it mark some fundamental change? Would there be physical effects beyond the color of the light? The priest, Easton Clark, had spoken of awakening. But what did that mean for the world? The temperature dropped further as the night deepened. 2 o'clock. 3. 4. Still I sat, clutching the amulet and watching the eastern sky, terrified of what might happen when dawn broke and completed whatever ritual had been set in motion. The stars began to fade around 5:30. A pale grayness touched the horizon. The first hint that night was ending. I gripped the amulet tighter, feeling it grow warmer in my hand. My heart pounded as I stared at the lightening sky, waiting to see whether the sun would rise golden or blood red, whether the world as we knew it would continue or change forever. The stars began to fade around 5:30. A pale grayness touched the horizon. The first hint that night was ending. I gripped the amulet tighter, feeling it grow warmer in my hand. My heart pounded as I stared at the lightening sky, waiting to see whether the sun would rise golden or blood red, whether the world as we knew it would continue or change forever. Minutes passed with excruciating slowness as the light grew stronger. I held my breath as the first sliver of sun broke over the horizon. Yellow. Normal, golden yellow. I blinked hard, certain my eyes were playing tricks on me. But as more of the sun revealed itself, the color remained unchanged, the same ordinary sunrise I'd seen thousands of times before. The past few months had changed everything. "It's normal," I said, my voice barely audible. "It's just a regular sunrise." Jennifer, who must have joined me just before dawn, leaned forward, her eyes wide. "You're right. It's not red at all." A wave of relief hit me with such force that my legs nearly gave out. I sank down onto the porch steps, still clutching the amulet, and let out a shaky breath that turned into something between a laugh and a sob. "Thank God," I whispered, watching as the golden light spilled across the Sussex countryside. My whole body trembled. The tension that had been building for months suddenly released, leaving me feeling hollow and lightheaded. Jennifer sat beside me, her arm around my shoulders. "Do you think it's over?" "I don't know," I said honestly. "I truly don't know." We stayed on the porch until the sun was fully up, neither of us willing to look away until we were completely certain. The day brightened into a crisp autumn morning, sunlight sparkling on dew-covered grass. Birds sang in the nearby oak trees as if nothing unusual had ever happened, and perhaps, to them, it hadn't. Later that morning, I found myself constantly looking out windows, checking and rechecking the sky as if the sun might suddenly change color. Though the immediate danger seemed to have passed, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were still balanced on some kind of edge. The knock at our door came just after 2 in the afternoon. I opened it to find a delivery boy holding a telegram. "Telegram for Mr. Parker, sir," he said, handing me the envelope. I gave him a few coins and closed the door, my hands suddenly unsteady as I tore it open. The message was brief but clear. "Planned test postponed. Stop unexplained equipment failures. Stop all readings returned. Normal. Stop will update when possible. Stop Anderson." I read it 3 times before handing it to Jennifer, who had come to stand beside me. "Equipment failures," I said as she read. "The test was canceled." Jennifer looked up from the telegram. "Do you think there's a connection between the normal sunrise and the test being postponed?" I walked to the window again, staring out at the perfectly ordinary blue sky. "It has to be. The timing is too perfect to be coincidence." My mind raced with possibilities. Was it the shrine in Hiroshima that Tanaka had mentioned? Had the rebuilding of that sacred place somehow appeased Amaterasu? Or was it something else entirely? Had the goddess simply decided to give humanity another chance? The shrine, I murmured. Tanaka said they were rebuilding it as an offering. Maybe that worked. Jennifer touched my arm gently. Or maybe postponing the nuclear test was enough. A sign that we're not going to make the same mistake again. I nodded slowly, though I wasn't convinced. The wooden amulet remained warm in my pocket, not burning hot as it had been during the red sunrises, but still warmer than any piece of wood had any right to be. Whatever force had been awakened hadn't gone back to sleep entirely. Throughout the afternoon, I found myself checking and rechecking the telegram, as if its words might change. I couldn't fully trust that the danger had passed. The amulet stayed in my pocket, where I could touch it periodically to reassure myself. As evening approached, Jennifer prepared dinner. A simple meal of roast chicken, potatoes, and carrots. The normalcy of it felt both comforting and strange, after months of living with the shadow of the third sunrise hanging over us. We sat across from each other at our small dining table, the golden light of our oil lamp casting a warm glow over the room. The smell of rosemary and chicken filled the air, and for a moment, it almost felt like we were just an ordinary couple having an ordinary meal. "I need to tell you everything," I said suddenly, setting down my fork. "Not just parts of it, or the things that make sense. All of it." Jennifer nodded, her face serious. "I'm listening." So I told her everything about meeting Nathan Tanaka in Nagasaki and how he warned me that the bombing had awakened something ancient. About the day in Hiroshima when I met Priest Yamamoto, who gave me the wooden amulet, and how I later discovered the priest had been dead for weeks when I spoke to him. I told her about the warnings of divine awakening, the 3 red sunrises that would mark the threshold of Amaterasu's anger. "I know how crazy it sounds," I said when I'd finished. "A dead priest, an angry goddess, magical warnings tied to nuclear tests. It sounds like I've lost my mind." Jennifer reached across the table and took my hand. "I saw the red sunrises too, Hayden. I felt how hot that amulet got. Those things happened, whether they make sense or not." Her acceptance nearly undid me. I squeezed her hand, grateful beyond words. "I can't just go back to normal," I said after a long moment. "Even if the immediate danger is past. What's to stop it from happening again? What if we build more bombs, conduct more tests, cross that threshold in the future?" Jennifer studied my face. "What are you thinking?" "There are groups forming. People worried about nuclear weapons, trying to stop their spread. I've been thinking about joining them, using my experience in the military to give credibility to the cause." Without mentioning the goddess or the amulet, Jennifer said, understanding immediately. "Yes, I'd have to stick to the facts that others would accept. The destruction I witnessed, the human cost, the danger of radiation. But I'd know the real reason. I'd be trying to prevent us from ever disturbing Amaterasu again." Jennifer nodded, her expression solemn. "I think you should. I'll support you, whatever you decide." As we finished our meal in thoughtful silence, I felt the weight of responsibility settling onto my shoulders. I might never know for certain what had halted the progression of events. The shrine, the postponed test, or some divine mercy. What I did know was that humanity had come frighteningly close to crossing a boundary we didn't understand. And I couldn't simply stand by and let it happen again. The amulet remained warm in my pocket. A constant reminder of forces beyond our comprehension and the thin line we walked between safety and destruction. Whatever power had granted us this reprieve, I knew in my bones that it was watching, waiting to see what we would do with the second chance we'd been given. I joined anti-nuclear proliferation efforts throughout the 1950s as the Cold War intensified. What started as attending small meetings in London grew into organizing rallies and writing pamphlets. The world seemed to have forgotten the lessons of Hiroshima and Nagasaki too quickly, racing toward bigger bombs and deadlier weapons. When I spoke at gatherings, I introduced myself as a former lieutenant who had seen Hiroshima firsthand. That military background gave weight to my words that civilian activists couldn't match. Lieutenant Adams served in the occupation forces. Organizers would say before I took the podium, "He's seen what these weapons do." I never mentioned Amaterasu in my speeches. I never spoke about an elderly priest who had died weeks before I met him, or about blood-red sunrises, or about a wooden amulet that stayed warm to the touch. These things remained private, known only to Jennifer and me. What I did share were the stark images of Hiroshima's destruction. The shadows burned into walls, the skeletal buildings, the stories of radiation sickness that continued long after the blast. "We cannot allow this to happen again," became my refrain. Not to anyone, anywhere. My habit of checking the sunrise each morning never faded. Through the birth of our children in the early 50s, through job changes and house moves, through every ordinary day of family life, I woke before dawn. Jennifer understood. Sometimes she joined me, wrapping a robe around herself and standing beside me at our bedroom window. Most mornings I watched alone. My breath held until the normal golden light broke across the horizon. This ritual persisted even decades later, becoming so ingrained that our children accepted it as just another of Dad's quirks, like my collection of books on Japanese culture or my insistence on reading multiple newspapers each day. During the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962, I barely slept. Each dawn found me on our back porch, the wooden amulet clutched so tightly in my hand that it left impressions on my palm. The world teetered on a knife edge of destruction as American and Soviet leaders played their dangerous game. I was 43 then, with teenage children who didn't fully grasp why their father looked so haunted. "We're going to be fine, Dad," my daughter said one morning, finding me staring at the eastern sky. "Everyone at school says Kennedy won't let anything happen." I nodded, but couldn't explain the real source of my terror. That humanity was about to cross that terrible threshold again, that we might awaken what had merely been watching us since 1946. The amulet seemed hotter those October mornings, though Jennifer said she couldn't feel any difference when she held it. When the crisis passed, the relief left me lightheaded. I sat at our kitchen table and wept while Jennifer held my hand. Our children looked confused, and it was then I decided they deserved to know something of what had shaped their father's life. That evening, I told them a carefully edited version of my time in Japan. I described meeting Nathan Tanaka and his cryptic warnings. I mentioned visiting Hiroshima and speaking with locals who believed the bombing had disturbed sacred ground. I showed them the amulet, describing it as a gift from a Japanese priest who asked me to remember what I had seen. "Is that why you check the sunrise every day?" my son asked. "Yes," I answered simply, "to remember." It wasn't the whole truth, but it was enough. They nodded with a solemn understanding of teenagers who were beginning to see their parents as flawed, complex human beings. The years passed. My hair grayed, then whitened. My children grew up and had children of their own. The Cold War stretched on, with periods of tension and détente. Through it all, I continued my work, speaking at universities, writing letters to members of parliament, joining international conferences on disarmament. My grandchildren knew me as the serious grandfather who had once been a soldier and now talked about peace. The wooden amulet stayed with me. I kept it in my pocket during the day and on my bedside table at night. When arthritis made my fingers too stiff to easily remove it from my pocket, I had a small leather pouch made that I could wear around my neck. Jennifer never questioned this, even when other habits and possessions were set aside with age. She died in 1989, peacefully in her sleep. At her funeral, our children and grandchildren surrounded me, their support unwavering, even as I felt adrift without my partner of 43 years. That night, alone in our bed, I held the amulet and whispered to it as though Jennifer might hear through it, might understand that I was still keeping my vigil. As an elderly man in my 70s, watching the Berlin Wall fall and the Cold War thaw, I still wondered about what had really happened back in 1946. Had humanity narrowly escaped divine judgment? Or was the goddess simply watching, waiting for mankind to cross another boundary? The nuclear arsenals remained, though reduced in number. New threats emerged: environmental damage, genetic engineering, technologies that stretched into realms we barely understood. My grandchildren visited often. The youngest, a girl of 10 with Jennifer's curious mind, found me on the back porch one morning, watching the sunrise. "Why do you always watch the sun come up, Grandpa?" she asked, sitting beside me with her pajamas still on. I smiled and patted her hand. "Because each normal sunrise is a gift," I said, "a sign that we've managed not to make too big a mistake for one more day." She didn't understand, of course. How could she? Even to my own ears, the full story seemed too strange to believe. A Japanese officer warning about awakening something ancient. A dead priest appearing with an amulet and prophecies of red sunrises. The abnormal readings at nuclear facilities that corresponded with those blood-colored dawns. The test that was mysteriously postponed when the third sunrise appeared normal. Yet I had witnessed enough to believe certain powers in the universe should remain undisturbed. Not gods, perhaps. At least, not in the way religions described them, but forces beyond our comprehension, attuned to balances we disrupted at our peril. My last years were quiet ones. I moved in with my daughter after a fall left me with a broken hip. My bedroom window faced east. My one request when they arranged the move. The books I'd collected filled the shelves. Their spines faded, but their contents well thumbed. Books on nuclear policy sat alongside volumes on Shinto beliefs, scientific journals next to mythological texts. I dedicated my life to ensuring humanity would develop the wisdom necessary to match its devastating technological power. It was a task too large for one man. I knew that. But I did what I could through speeches, through letters, through conversations with young people eager to make a difference. Always, I emphasized the responsibility that came with knowledge, the care we needed to take with forces we didn't fully understand. The amulet grew lighter as I grew heavier with age, as though it was absorbing my concerns, taking on the burden I would eventually set down. On clear mornings, watching the sun rise golden over the garden, I sometimes felt peace. Other days, hearing news of new weapons tests or brewing conflicts, I felt the familiar dread return. My grandchildren and great-grandchildren visited often. They knew me as the grandfather who told stories about Japan, who had books in Japanese he couldn't read but kept anyway, who watched every sunrise without fail. They didn't know about the nights I woke in panic from dreams of red skies, or how I still checked international news for reports of unusual atmospheric phenomena. I carried this burden throughout my remaining years. The knowledge of what I had seen, what I had felt, what I still believed, despite having no proof beyond a wooden amulet and my own memories. It wasn't a burden I could share fully, not even with those I loved most. But it was one I bore willingly, because someone needed to remember, to watch, to warn if necessary. and each golden sunrise brought another day of reprieve, another chance for humanity to learn, to grow wiser, to step back from boundaries we shouldn't cross.